I'm a lover of books. I love books. Everybody who knows me as someone who loves books. I think that's like the first thing that people identify about me. I've read at least 1,000 books or more, definitely more, but let's be humble and say 1,000. Okay, in the last 6 years, I've read more and more African books because at the Port Harcourt Book Club, we believe in promoting the literary ecosystem by reading Nigerian and African books. So people always ask me, what do you like about Nigerian books? What do you like about Nigerian books? And I always tell them that I like the familiarity of the books. I like the fact that, I see myself in the books. I see my neighbors. I can identify the story. The story resonates with me. It tells us where we're coming from and where we are. Of course, that is one side of the story. There is also the side of what I don't like about Nigerian books. The fact that I cannot escape my reality. I'm living it and I'm reading it in books. Everything I'm living, I'm seeing in the books. I cannot go outside of the books. So in essence, what I like about Nigerian books is also what I do not like about them. A few weeks ago, I was surfing through the net and then I came across this story from the late satirist, Pius Adesomi. And in the piece is titled, The Nigerian Future 20 Years Ago. In that piece, the piece was written in 2018. In that piece, he said that an American magazine had called for writers to send in futuristic stories. And the winning piece was by an American writer who had sent in a story that he wrote to an imaginary Nigerian African friend 50 years into the future. Now, the outstanding thing about that piece for Pius and for me as I was reading it was the fact that 50 years into the future, Nigerians were still going about in tricycles, keke napep. And that, for me, is the problem with Nigerian literature. The fact that year in, year out, our stories remain the same. It doesn't evolve. It's basically the same story. It is not looking for all the possibilities that storytelling offers. When you look at our stories, you find that the stories talk about colonialism. It talks about tribalism. It talks about politics. It talks about family life, fertility, domestic abuse, and more recently, poverty, and more recently, migration, Japa culture. So it's in our books somewhere there. To be honest, stories should reflect the society where it is written because people need to see themselves in their stories. However, where is the place of modernization? Where is the place of creativity? Where is the place of innovation? What type of stories should we be telling at this time? Imagine for a moment that we take the things that we like about ourselves. Imagine that we take our culture and our identity and write them into our stories, but in a different dimension. Imagine that stories are told about Odum, the Okrika deity. Imagine that stories are told about Simingi and Tolofari. These are Boni deities. Or stories are told about Amadioha. I'm a huge fan of Big Brother Nigeria. Unrepentant fan. I don't know. I can't help myself. So, in the last Big Brother Nigeria, I watched a presentation where a housemate, Cheesy, made a presentation of an Ofo, which is the Igbo symbol of truth and strength. In that presentation, when someone told a lie, the Ofo would illuminate. And then when they were telling the truth, it would just stay still. Imagine that stories are told about our revered items. It would be fascinating. It would be interesting. You want to read it. Of course, we do not want our stories to be completely unfamiliar because when you read an unfamiliar story, you feel you can't identify with the story. There is no connect, and there needs to be a connect somewhere. So that is why we need to take the things that we like about ourselves and add it in a way that we can tell different stories with those things. You know that in recent times, there have actually been stories, a lot of stories and other art forms in Afrofuturism. Most recently, the Black Panther stories. So there are lots of works in Afrofuturism, which is actually very, very good because, representation matters. We need to see ourselves in stories. We need to see our arts out there. However, we need to tell our own stories. So because most of these stories are being told for us, people tell the stories. You look at some of the stories and you cannot identify a particular place. It's just generally Africa, which is why most people mistake Africa to be a country, because they are trying to create just one unified Africa. But we're very different. We're very diverse. The Okrika person, as similar as Okrika and Bonny are, there are actually differences. So those stories need to come to play. We need to see our individual stories. I need to see a story and be like, oh, this is from Bonny. I can tell this is, this is what we do. That identification really matters. We need to be able to tell superhero stories, make scientific breakthrough, technological breakthrough around our deities and cultural items, around our revered cultural items. Everybody around the world is doing it. Today, a lot of people watch Thor. Thor is a Nordic god. And we watch it. We know so much more about Thor than we even know about our own gods. Here we say, oh, those are diabolical. And we don't want to have anything to do with it. But we have things to do with other gods that are not a part of, our culture. So we need to be able to tell stories that are from our own cultures, told in such an inspiring way that people want to adapt it. Writers should write stories that are so outlandishly imaginative that people want to adapt it. And I'm not talking about when you read a book and you're like, oh, this man was actually writing for... He's writing for TV, because there are certain books, when you read a lot of books, you can tell when a book has been written solely because the author wants it to be adapted to maybe a series or maybe movies. I'm not talking about that. Because when you read those kind of books, you also feel like the book is not complete in its form, except it is translated into the form that it hopes to get to. I'm talking about just the potency of the ideas pushing or calling people to change it into different forms. When an idea is so potent, you don't want it to stick to one category. You want to push it to other categories. You look at the work, it is very, very interesting. The idea is so potent, you want to share it. So you can change it to animation, you can change it to video games, you can change it to all other forms. Let's take, for instance, 1984, the book 1984 by George Orwell. That book was actually written to satirize communism in the then USSR. However, it is the birthplace of the program that I love so much, Big Brother. The idea of Big Brother is gotten from the book 1984. I'm sure that Orwell at no point thought that his book was going to be made into a reality TV show. Also, there is the book, The Eye of Darkness by Dean Koontz, where he talks about a virus or a pandemic that had started from Wuhan, China. And when COVID started, everybody was basically going with various conspiracy theories. Oh, they've talked about this before. It was in this book. It was in this book. That is the power of stories. Stories have the capacity to birth ideas. So we should be using that power. We should be telling stories that is able to shape the type of things that we want to see. Because when we tell stories and those stories give these ideas, people will run with it. Stories, people take ideas, they evolve, they create new things, they modernize things that are old from the ideas that they've gotten. They become, they are forced to put the ideas that they have into work. To me, it is very important that our stories move from verisimilitude to the speculative. It is very important that our stories move from stories imitating life to life now imitating stories. There are actually a few people doing this type of work. There is Ine Diokora for writing speculative fiction about African deities and culture. There is Tommy Adeyemi. There is also the online speculative magazine, omenana.com. However, these are in the fringes and they are in the minority. The people doing them are in the minority. They need to move mainstream, and this should be the focus of our stories, betting a future that we want to see. Thank you very much.